Imagine ruling the most powerful empire on Earth. You command armies. You control millions of lives. A single word from your lips can mean wealth or execution. And yet, you can't sleep. Because somewhere in that palace, behind one of those smiling faces, someone is sharpening a knife with your name on it. This wasn't paranoia for these rulers. This was Tuesday. One of them executed his own son in a fit of rage, then wept over the body for weeks. Another slept in a different room every night, terrified that assassins had already memorized his route. One man killed millions, not in battle, but out of pure, unrelenting suspicion. And another? He declared himself a god right before his own guards stabbed him to death. These men held unimaginable power, and it destroyed them from the inside out. And the terrifying part? Some of them were actually right. Power is a strange thing. The more of it you have, the more you stand to lose. For most of human history, being a ruler wasn't just a position of privilege. It was one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Emperors were poisoned at dinner. Kings were strangled in their sleep. Heirs were murdered before they ever sat on the throne. Assassination wasn't a rare tragedy. It was a standard political tool. So it makes sense that many rulers developed a certain wariness, a habit of watching the room, trusting no one completely, keeping their enemies close, and then eliminating them anyway just to be safe. Some rulers became cautious, calculated, careful. Others descended into something far darker. These are the most paranoid rulers in history. Men whose fear of betrayal consumed everything around them, and ultimately consumed them too. Ivan the Terrible, Russia, the 1500s. A boy grows up watching the people who are supposed to protect him destroy each other for power. Ivan IV, later known to history as Ivan the Terrible, was only 3 years old when his father died, leaving him nominally in charge of Russia with his mother as regent. Then his mother died too. Poisoned, most historians believe, by rival noble families called the Boyars. Ivan was 8 years old, surrounded by men who smiled at him in the daytime and plotted against each other at night. He watched them humiliate his servants, ignore his orders, use him as a puppet while they carved up power for themselves. He never forgot it. When Ivan finally took real control of Russia and became its first official czar in 1547, he was already a man shaped by betrayal. For a while, he ruled well, expanding Russia's borders, reforming its legal system, and earning genuine admiration. But things were about to get worse. In 1553, Ivan fell gravely ill, and in that moment of weakness, he discovered just how thin his allies' loyalty really was. Several boyars refused to swear allegiance to his infant son, already positioning themselves for a post-Ivan Russia. Ivan recovered, but something inside him didn't. The paranoia that had been simmering for decades began to boil over. In 1565, Ivan created the Oprichnina, a state within a state entirely loyal to him. Its enforcers, the Oprichniki, dressed in black, rode black horses and carried the severed heads of dogs on their saddles as a symbol of their purpose, sniffing out traitors. They were Ivan's private terror machine, and they answered to no one but him. What followed was a reign of pure, unleashed fear. Entire noble families were executed on suspicion alone. Torture chambers operated around the clock. Villages were massacred. In 1570, Ivan turned on the city of Novgorod, convinced it was plotting to defect to Poland. His forces spent weeks slaughtering its population. Estimates range from a few thousand to over 10,000 dead. And this is where the story takes its darkest turn. In 1581, during a heated argument, Ivan struck his own son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, with a spiked staff. The blow was fatal. Ivan watched his son die over the following days and was said to have been overcome with grief, weeping, tearing at his own hair, inconsolable. He had spent his entire reign hunting traitors, and in one moment of rage, he had destroyed his own dynasty. Ivan the Terrible died 3 years later, having left Russia fractured, terrified, and leaderless. His paranoia hadn't protected him. It had simply made him the most dangerous man in the room, to everyone, including himself. Huang. Apple rode away more than 17 centuries earlier. A different kind of paranoia was reshaping an entire civilization. Huang unified China in 221 BC, ending centuries of war between rival kingdoms and declaring himself its first emperor. By any historical measure, it was a staggering achievement. He built roads, standardized weights and measurements, and began the foundations of what would become the Great Wall. He also became utterly terrified of dying. It started with the assassination attempts. There were at least 3 documented efforts to kill him, including one where an attacker got close enough to shatter his carriage with a hammer, narrowly missing Qin himself. After that, the emperor's security became obsessive. He had dozens of palaces built, all connected by hidden corridors, and he slept in a different one each night. No one was told in advance where he would be. Anyone who revealed his location was executed on the spot. He stopped appearing in public almost entirely. But it wasn't just assassination that Qin Shi Huang feared. He was terrified of death itself. He became fixated on immortality, sending expeditions across the known world to find the legendary elixir of life. Alchemists and mystics flooded his court, each promising a path to eternal existence. He drank concoctions laced with mercury, believing it held the key to living forever. He executed scholars who questioned his rule and ordered the burning of books that contained ideas he found threatening, erasing history itself in an attempt to control the future. The man who had conquered China could not conquer his own fear of mortality. And here lies one of history's most devastating ironies. Qin Shi Huang, the emperor obsessed with living forever, was almost certainly killed by the very mercury potions his alchemists had convinced him would grant immortality. He died in 210 BC, aged just 49. His dynasty, the first in Chinese history, collapsed within 4 years of his death. He had unified an empire, built monuments that would last millennia, and he spent the final years of his life hiding in darkness, drinking poison, and waiting for a death he could never outrun. If Ivan the Terrible built a terror apparatus and Qin Shi Huang hid from the world, then Joseph Stalin did something arguably more chilling. He weaponized suspicion itself and turned an entire nation into an instrument of paranoia. Stalin's rise to power in the Soviet Union following Lenin's death in the 1920s was a masterclass in political ruthlessness. He outmaneuvered rivals, built alliances, then broke them the moment they were no longer useful. By the early 1930s, he was effectively the supreme leader of the USSR, and he trusted no one. Not his political rivals, not his generals, not his oldest friends. The Great Purge, which ran roughly from 1936 to 1938, was one of the most terrifying episodes of political violence in the 20th century. Stalin ordered the arrest, imprisonment, and execution of millions of Soviet citizens, military officers, party officials, intellectuals, factory workers, ordinary people, on charges of sabotage, espionage, or disloyalty. Show trials were staged in which the accused, often having been tortured for weeks, publicly confessed to crimes they hadn't committed, then were shot anyway. Entire branches of the Red Army's leadership were wiped out. Senior officials who had known Stalin for decades suddenly found themselves denounced as foreign agents. In Stalin's Soviet Union, survival often depended on staying invisible. And what happened next shocked everyone, even those closest to him. Stalin's paranoia didn't stop at political enemies. He rotated his bodyguards constantly, convinced that any long-serving guard could be turned. He had multiple tasters sample every meal before he ate. He stopped sleeping at predictable times. His inner circle, the men who met with him regularly, who drank with him late into the night, lived in a state of permanent dread. Each of them understood that the man laughing with them at the table could have them arrested by morning. Several of them were. When Stalin died in 1953, he had been left alone for hours before anyone dared check on him, his guards too frightened to disturb him, even as he lay dying on the floor of his room. His paranoia had become so all-consuming that the people around him were paralyzed even when he needed help. He had shaped the Soviet Union in his image. And that image, in the end, was a man completely alone, Caligula. And then there is Caligula. The Roman Emperor Gaius, better known by his childhood nickname Caligula, meaning Little Boot, began his reign in 37 AD to genuine celebration. His predecessor, Tiberius, had been a gloomy, suspicious tyrant. Caligula was young, charming, and seemingly full of promise. Rome exhaled. It didn't last. Within months of taking power, Caligula suffered a severe illness, and when he recovered, something was fundamentally different. Whether it was the illness itself, the trauma of growing up in the treacherous court of Tiberius, or simply the intoxication of absolute power, historians have debated for centuries. What's beyond debate is what happened next. Caligula began to see enemies everywhere. He had people executed for minor perceived slights. A senator who had looked at him the wrong way. A man whose joke had been reported to him out of context. He made nobles kneel and grovel in public humiliations that were clearly designed to test their submission. He appointed his horse to a priesthood, whether as a joke, a power display, or a sign of genuine psychological deterioration. No one could be sure. The uncertainty itself was part of the terror. His behavior toward perceived threats became increasingly extreme. He eliminated family members he suspected of plotting against him. He demanded to be worshipped as a living god. In part, historians believe, because a god could not be legitimately overthrown. If he was divine, any conspiracy against him was not just treason but sacrilege. It didn't work. In 41 AD, after less than 4 years in power, Caligula was assassinated by officers of his own Praetorian guard, the very men tasked with protecting him. The conspiracy he had feared and prepared against since the beginning of his reign had finally materialized. In trying to make himself untouchable, he had simply made himself insufferable, and that, in the end, was fatal. Why paranoia happens in power. Looking at these 4 men, an emperor of Russia, a unifier of China, a Soviet dictator, a Roman god king, a pattern emerges. None of them started as monsters. Each of them came to power in a world where betrayal was genuinely common, where assassination was a real possibility, and where trusting the wrong person could mean death. Their early suspicions weren't irrational. They were adaptive, but power isolates. The higher you rise, the fewer people can speak honestly to you, because the consequences of being wrong are too severe. Advisors tell you what you want to hear. Allies perform loyalty rather than feeling it. Every smile becomes ambiguous. And so the mind begins to fill in the gaps with worst-case scenarios. The paranoid ruler doesn't just see threats. They start manufacturing them, finding conspiracies and coincidences, treason and silence. Every purge removes the people most likely to push back, leaving only those willing to agree, which only deepens the isolation. When everyone around you wants you thrown, paranoia can feel like wisdom. The problem is that it never stops. There is always another suspect, always another threat. And the ruler who gives in to that logic eventually becomes the most dangerous thing in their own kingdom. History is full of rulers who fell to assassins, to armies, to plague, to bad luck. But the men in this story fell to something harder to see: the fear inside their own minds. Ivan the Terrible killed his dynasty with his own hands. Qin Shi Huang drank poison searching for immortality. Stalin died on the floor of his room while his terrified staff waited outside. Caligula was cut down by the guards he had never stopped suspecting. Some of their fears were justified. Assassination was real. Betrayal was common. Power really did attract conspirators. But unchecked paranoia doesn't just destroy enemies. It destroys everything. It hollows out empires, turns allies into suspects, and leaves the ruler more isolated with every passing year, until finally they are utterly alone at the center of a kingdom they burned down around themselves. The greatest danger to these rulers wasn't out there, lurking in the shadows. It was the voice in their own heads that told them to keep looking. Now, before going somewhere else or jumping to another video, subscribe me for more such interesting videos, and also press like, so this video shows in feed of more people, and press bell icon, so every time I upload new video, you know what to do.